Hi, it's Scott here from the Osteopathic practice. As you can see this time, much less hair. We did last week a charity head shave for Mind and raised just under £600, which was great. So we did a Facebook Live event. It was good fun. So I hope you're safe and well. Things are continuing. There's a glimmer of hope that lockdown may be kind of coming to an end, but we've got to sit tight and see how things are. So today we're going to talk about hot versus cold in terms of an acute or a recent injury. So let's say you've hurt your back or you've hurt your knee. Doesn't really matter how. The most important thing with this is that there's not a damage to the skin. There's no cuts, there's no grazes, so on and so forth. And it's a question that I often think about in clinic a lot. It's a question that I'm also asked a lot. What should I use in combination with treatment? Should I use heat or should I use cold? And if so, which one and where? So the truth of the matter is the research for both is really limited, especially with heat. Cold has quite a bit of research with the sports side. It seems to sort of gravitate towards that side. The heat, not so much. So a lot of this information is coming from my personal opinion, from what I've seen in clinic and so on and so forth. So first of all, let's talk about the effects of both. So the effects of cold, it's actually going to reduce blood getting to the area. It's going to reduce some of that inflammation that started when you've got the injury, and also it's going to reduce your sensation of pain through a few sort of neurological processes. And that's useful for various reasons. I think when you get an acute injury immediately, you often get a lot of swelling. So let's think about an ankle sprain, for instance. Typically that balloons up when you get, a melon around the ankle, as it were. It can get really, really big. You want to limit that inflammation to a degree because inflammation precedes pain, and also it kind of affects your function to a degree. So if things become really, really inflamed, that isn't always a good thing. Typically, if you think about if you have an injury, the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning, you notice that injury a bit more first thing. When you get up and move around, you generally feel better because you've flushed out the inflammation. So that's the effect of cold. It sort of calms everything down. The effects of heat is going to do the opposite. So it's going to increase the blood flow. It's going to increase inflammation. And also it won't increase pain, but it will decrease pain through neurological effects, but slightly different effects. But essentially you get a reduced pain. And again, you want to try and do this really, this is sort of to promote the healing process, to try and get fresh blood to the area a bit more. So with the cold, you get vasoconstriction, so it restricts the blood vessels. With the heat, you get vasodilation, it increases the blood vessels. And that's important to understand really what that does and when you might want to use that for your injury. So for me, I think it's important to look at the injury time and location. So an immediate injury, I think it's important to get on top of the inflammation pretty soon. So I'd use more cold in the first 3 days because your peak inflammation phase is going to be immediately after the injury, and then up to about 3 or 4 days later. That's when the inflammation starts to sort of subside a bit, so long as there hasn't been a repeated injury. And to stop that inflammation getting out of control, cold is a really useful way to kind of calm things down. Now, what's useful is that when the inflammation calms down, in theory, the healing process can kind of calm down a little bit too. The body kind of understands what inflammation is needed, and then that's why your rolled ankle doesn't stay inflamed for years on end. So I think it's useful to know that once that inflammation starts to settle down, if you want to try and promote the healing a bit more, if things are still a little bit sore, that's when you can start bringing in the heat element. That's going to increase your blood flow, kind of bring up that inflammation a little bit, because again, you want to try and increase this sort of tissue healing, so the inflammation is going to help you do that. So for me, that's the two big things really. Early on, use a bit of cold. After 3 or 4 days, use a bit more heat, or sort of tendency to lean towards the heat. Now, there is a useful thing of using both. So if you think about it, you can kind of use it as a bit of almost like a pump. So you can use the cold to flush the area out, and you can use heat to encourage fluid back in. Now that can be really, really useful for, again, I think a bit later on down the road when you have got maybe a recurring injury. So again, talking about, let's say, another ankle sprain, if you've got over the initial injury and it's feeling better, it's feeling stronger, you've had some treatment and you're noticing progression, there's less instability and so on. To keep on top of that, I think using a bit of heat and cold together is really, really good. So yeah, I think play with it. Preference makes a massive influence on this as well. So if you prefer cold, that's always going to make you feel better. If you prefer heat, vice versa, the same applies there. The one thing really is there's no real golden rule. A lot of it is down to the physiology and what you're trying to achieve. So think about cold ushers things out, heat brings things in. And in terms of application, time-wise, I think anything longer than 5-10 minutes is a bit too much, particularly for things that are really cold or really, really hot. The kind of main question is how cold is cold and how hot is hot. And just do what you know you can manage in 5 minutes. So I wouldn't put any ice directly on against the skin, and I wouldn't put any really hot water against the skin. And one thing about hot water, the hot water bottles are a great way to get heat towards the body. Commonly I hear people putting in boiling water, and they're not designed for that. I've heard of hot water bottles actually bursting and causing really bad skin burns, particularly on the back or anywhere you apply it. So just bear in mind that it's not appropriate for boiling water, so you don't want to burst anything. So application, you can use dry or wet. So dry in terms of you can use an ice pack, which would be dry if you're wrapped up in a towel, same as a hot water bottle, again that would be dry, and a dry heat against the skin itself. You can also use wet, so again water is really useful, hot water, cold water. Going back to the ankle, 2 buckets, one cold, one warm, alternating. That's a really fantastic way to get something like that sort of healing a bit further. And also you've got things like gels, so biofreeze or deep heat. They're sort of you apply to the skin and then you can kind of go about your day, and that's useful. I think a lot of athletes or a lot of people who are working, applying a bit of that to an area that's sore, you can kind of then get on with your day, and the pain kind of fades to the background a little bit. So there's a bit of an insight between hot and cold. There's no real golden rule. Have a go with it and see what works for you. I think the main thing really is do something. Maybe avoid the heat at the start if you're not too keen on heat. Either or is going to make a difference. The most important thing is some sort of temperature change is going to affect the pain level. It's going to reduce your pain level because there'll be a couple of neurological processes going on that's going to reduce your perception of pain. So any kind of temperature change will be useful. And then later on, maybe bring in the hot and cold just to keep things ticking over, that pumping technique, as it were, to bring the blood in and flush it out. But the most important thing really is, do something, and also try and keep moving. Keep weight bearing onto limbs that have got pain. Try and keep walking with your back pain if you can. And most importantly, keep yourself moving. So I hope that was useful, and take care.